Good morning, Al.
Good morning.
Here it is, another State of the Union. I don't know how many we've seen or been to, but it's probably more than anybody else would want to go to. But I've always actually enjoyed the State of the Union because it's a speech that should I stress, kind of set the stage for the year. I'm sure you've been part of this too. So let me toss it over to you first.
Well, to me, the State of the Union night, but just the preparation was, I always thought, one of the most fun times of the year. President Clinton, you had that great post yesterday about when, I guess it was the 1993. I couldn't remember which year, but I remember the incident
Joint session in 1993, right?
when they put the wrong speech on the teleprompter. But the way Clinton always used to do it is you had actually the excerpt from Tom Cullimer's book, and he got it right. I mean, what Clinton always used to do is we'd work on the speech, and then he'd work on it, and then he'd take a note piece of paper and write 8 or 9 words on it and throw the rest of it away and speak from it. Uh, so I can't imagine many presidents really being able to do this. This is one of his great talents. He gets the wrong speech on the teleprompter, and it's go time. And so to to most presidents, I assume they'd really fluster, and they do. I think that most of them do carry an actual text next to them, just in case. But Clinton just went off, gave his speech like he would. Nobody ever knew any different. But the thing
I think one of the most flustered people, because I actually went back and got the video of the whole address. Most flustered person was Vice President Gore, because Clinton, realizing it was the wrong speech, turned around and said to Gore, "It's the wrong speech." And it's like, so suddenly the Vice President of the United States has got to go fix this problem.
Al Gore had a lot of talents, but one of them wasn't the ability to speak off the cuff like Clinton did. The greatest speech Clinton ever did, that he talked about in his first memoir, My Life, was the speech he gave to the DLC in 1991 that really set the stage for his presidential candidacy. And I'll never forget that because we worked all night on the draft, or almost all night, and then Clinton really late in the night said, "You guys get out of here. I'm going to have and just give me somebody who can type." And so we reconvened about 7 o'clock in the morning, and he showed us what he had done, and we said, "That's fine." And then he threw it away and wrote his 9 words on a piece of paper and gave what was the speech that defined the next 10 years.
Yeah, which is what it should be. So I'll give you a contrast, which is Ronald Reagan. I always enjoyed this period of time, and so for the 8 years that I was in the White House, President Reagan would essentially get away. Before he got away for Christmas, he would talk to the speechwriters, and he would get a draft while he was away for the holidays, and he would begin to work on the things he told them that he wanted to talk about. And he'd come back after the holidays, and a few of us would assemble, and we would get literally a legal pad, yellow legal pad of his handwritten speech, which he had recrafted from what the speechwriters had given him. That would get completed early in January, and then he would spend a couple of weeks perfecting it, working on the timing. But for him, and really for the administration, this was a chance to lay out a plan for the course of the year and beyond. And to my way of thinking, that's what a State of the Union should be. Somehow, I don't think we're going to see that tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the thing I always liked about State of the Union time is maybe a month or two in advance, probably closer to two. And this is really important to somebody like me because I was outside. Clinton would ask us to do a long memorandum on what his priorities ought to be. And then we'd sort of put it together, and he'd do his speech. And as you said, it would really outline the year. But my favorite, actually, State of the Union was in 1995. As you remember, in 1994, you guys just clobbered us and won the Congress for the first time in, what was it, 40 years. And with Newt Gingrich, and it was, so we had to do a comeback, and we started this process. Early on, we had a session up at Camp David, brought in some people, and on the morning of the speech in 1995, actually the night before, he sent me a draft and said, "What do you think?" And I did a note and said, I think this is 3 speeches, and it doesn't hang together at all. So I get a call at 10 o'clock in the morning. He says, "Rewrite." And so I got Bruce Reed, who was his domestic policy advisor and my longtime cohort at the DLC, and we both took a particular point that we wanted to emphasize and wrote a new introduction. And we gave it to him at 6 o'clock. And one of the reasons this was the longest speech ever was because what we had done were 2 sections that tied the speech together. They put it on top of the speech. And so he gave our thematic version, which was instrumental in his comeback for 96. But then he also gave the rest of the speech. Years later, I just picked up I guess in the days of compact discs, a disc of great presidential speeches, which had some from Reagan and Roosevelt, and one from Clinton. It was the section of the State of the Union that Bruce and I wrote.
I'll be darned. That's neat. Well, so my favorite, and I'll do this quickly, but my favorite preparation was sitting around kind of after Thanksgiving and talking with Mike Deaver, who really controlled President Reagan's schedule. And I said, we're going to go into speech preparation, the departments and the agencies who at that time were coming through my Office of Cabinet Affairs. They're all going to send in all this stuff and we're going to, digest it. I said, we need a different approach. We need to do something different. And I said, I just finished this book, Megatrends. And I said, it's really fascinating. Whether you agree with everything or not doesn't matter. It gets you thinking about the future. What if we brought in a futurist or two to talk to the president? And Deaver said, I love that idea. So with no other clearance from anybody, we began scheduling a few lunches with futurists who would come in. And occasionally they'd be spotted in the West Wing and people go, what are they doing here? Lo and behold, they're having lunch with President Reagan. But he loved it. He loved the idea of just talking to somebody completely outside of government, which is, I know, one of the great values that you brought as somebody who had a broader perspective than those of us sitting in that little bubble we were living in. But somebody completely outside of government, in the case of the futurists, who could talk about where the country was headed and what was likely to happen and what different scenarios. And what difference did it make in the State of the Union? I don't know, but I do know that it showed me how interested President Reagan was in thinking more broadly and opening up and using this opportunity to open up more about his vision for the future.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we always used to bring outside people. One of the people who helped us in the 1995 one was Bob Putnam, who had written Bowling Alone. But that's one of the great things, because as you know, in the White House, it's probably a lot worse now than it was even when we were there. You're in such a bubble because you don't even have to talk to anybody. Nobody can come to see you unless you approve them and clear them to come into the White House. So it's very easy to get caught up in your own bubble and not have any sense of what's going on outside.
Hey, before we go, I think we probably should at least touch on something you and I have been kicking around a little bit, and that is, what to make of this Supreme Court 6-3 decision against President Trump and his tariff policy. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the thing that struck me is Justice Gorsuch's, I guess he wrote the opinion, and he talked about a couple of things that are really important, sort of central to my political belief. One is that, it's not a bad thing that Congress is deliberative, sort of inefficient, because that deliberation can really, protect basically protect our liberties. And the other thing that I got from that decision was the importance of of reform. in the long-term consequences of any kind of reform, because in our system, we may not think about this all the time when we're going through a period like this, but parties change, and you can't, if you try to get political advantage from in the short term from any kind of reforms or changes in the system, it's likely to come back and bite you in the rear end in 4 years. And I learned that from Senator Muskie during Watergate, because we were at a hearing one time, and a witness started, this was during the Nixon administration, right as Watergate was breaking. One of the witnesses just, started berating Congress for not moving faster and how inefficient it was. And Muskie leaned over to me and said, someday we'll be thankful for the inefficiencies of the Congress because they will have saved our liberties. Yeah. And I've never forgotten that.
So true, so true. Well, I too was fascinated by Gorsuch's concurring opinion on the court. And my takeaway, I totally agree with you, my takeaway in addition was that he was basically saying to Congress, hey, ladies and gentlemen, buck up. You've got a job to do. Take back your authority and your power and use it, because we're counting on it. And I hope that message comes across loud and clear.
Boy, I do too. My years in the Senate, working in the Senate, mostly for Senator Muskie, were most of the 1970s. And then I was back in the early 80s when you guys were in your first term in the House leadership. And in those days, it was bipartisan agreement that they'd protect those congressional prerogatives. And now to watch the lapdogs in the Congress, it is just, well, for one thing, it is a really, if you talk about things that are a real threat to our basically constitutional republic, that is one of the most important, because if each of the three branches of government doesn't do its job, then one of the others is going to dominate.
Yeah, so true. Well, listen, we're about not as we're talking here, we're not quite 12 hours away from the State of the Union speech, and I'm looking forward to the question of the day being answered early on, which is, will he actually shake the hand of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court this year? Somehow, I don't think so, but we'll see.
Yeah, it will be interesting. Yeah. I mean, I can't believe, well, you have no idea with Trump, but he could just go up there and berate the court. I mean,
you just don't know. Hey, listen, we're going to talk later this week, and we'll, right. I'm sure, be talking more about the State of the Union speech.
Great.
Take care.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.